हाय एवरीवन, आई एम बैक विद द न्यू वीडियो। सो आज के इस वीडियो में हम लोग बात करेंगे कि हम लोग क्लस्टर्ड एंड नॉन क्लस्टर्ड इंडेक्सेस कैसे बनाएं। ओके, सो क्लस्टर्ड एंड नॉन क्लस्टर्ड इंडेक्स बनाने का एक ही थॉट प्रोसेस है फॉर द फास्टेस्ट रिट्रीवल ऑफ आवर डेटा। ओके, एंड जहां पे हम लोग को फास्टेस्ट रिट्रीवल करना होगा, वी हैव टू डू सम इंडेक्सिंग. Now the question is how we are going to decide on which column we are going to make these clustered and non-clustered indexes. Okay, to understand this particular concept, you have to go and check out my previous videos on table scan, index seek and index scan. Okay, now let's quickly move to SSMS and check how we are going to create this clustered and non-clustered index. So here I have this particular table called employees. Okay, so aap clustered, let me show you how you can create a cluster index. So I will show you two different techniques of creating this cluster, these indexes. Okay, and the only motive of creating these indexes is for faster retrieval of data. Okay, so let's see how we are going to create the cluster and non-cluster. What is the syntax of creating the cluster and non-cluster indexes? So right now I'm going to create a clustered index on employee ID. Okay, and then we will decide. So first I'm going to create a clustered index, and what is the syntax? To create a clustered index, you will have to write. So I'm going to create a clustered index here. Okay, on employee ID. So for creating a clustered index, you have to write create clustered index, and you have to give the index name. Okay, so right now I'm giving the index name as ix underscore employee ID, and I'm going to create this cluster index on employees table. Okay, and I want employee ID, so I'm going to create the cluster index on employee ID. Okay, so this is the syntax of creating this particular cluster index. If I execute this particular cluster index, here you could see that the command completed successfully. But so if I refresh this particular employees table, and if you could see in this indexes column, I have created a cluster index. But now the question is that whether I will be able to create another cluster index. Let's suppose I don't want any indexes. I want another index. Okay, let's suppose I want another index on this particular. So I want an index on first name and last name. So are we able to create a cluster index? So let's try to do it. Okay, if I try to create another cluster index, and I'm just naming it as name, and I'm changing this as first name comma last name. So are we able to create this cluster index? No. So the problem with SQL Server that we cannot create a cluster index more than one. Okay, we cannot create it. Okay, but we can create n number of clustered index, n number of non-clustered index. Okay, so if I just change it to a non-clustered index, I am just naming it as ix underscore name, and if I execute it, here you could see that, and if I refresh it, here you could see that this non-clustered index is being created. Okay, so the summary of this particular clustered and non-clustered index is that in indexing we require indexing for the fastest retrieval of our data. Okay, secondly, we want there are two type of different indexes, that is clustered and a non-clustered index. We can only create a single clustered index, and we can create n number of non-clustered index. Okay, even though the size of the table become big if you create more and more indexes. Okay, so this is one thing. Now there is another way of creating these indexes. Okay, so here you have seen that we can create indexes based on script. Now we can also create indexes based on this particular object explorer. So here if you right click on this particular indexes column and click on new indexes, as you already know that I have created one cluster index, so I'm not able to create any of the cluster index, another cluster index. So I'm going to create another non-cluster index. Let's suppose I'm going to create a non-clustered index on this particular size. Okay, so include columns. So I have let's suppose I want to create a clustered index on email, phone and hire date. Okay, non-clustered index. If I added it, here you could see that I have added email, phone and hire date as a non-clustered index, and I'm just naming it as ix underscore email, phone and hire date. Okay, I'm just naming it like that, and if I execute it, here you could see that using this particular way also you can create a non-clustered index. Okay, here you could see that this particular thing that I'm able to create this non-clustered index. So this is a short video on clustered and non-clustered index.